Dog Book Chats with Bryce and Kenzie, my friends of the BK Pets. And we are going to start and jump right into it today. If you have not seen the first version where we went over chapter 1 of this book by Rodney Habib and Dr. Karen Becker, it'll be linked in the description so you can get caught up. But we are going chapter by chapter every week talking about our thoughts on the Forever Dog. So we're going to jump into it. But Bryce and Kenzie, why don't you say a little bit about who you are for those people that are watching that are curious of what you do and where they can find you.
Totally. I guess this is our first introduction to Rachel Fusaro's YouTube channel. So
Yeah.
thank you, everyone. Yeah, so we're Bryce and Kenzie. We're a 20-something married couple. We've been married for a couple years now. And we kind of got into content creation in the last year or so. We had a business doing pet stuff that kind of thrust us into creating content for it. And here we are, but we could not be more excited. We're loving the Forever Dog. We've actually, I think all three of us had read tidbits of it and like spurts, but never cover to cover. So it's been fun to kind of go through it and really break it down and talk to people about it.
And you can
Oh,
find us
absolutely.
on all platforms at the BK Pets. And we're pretty similar to Rachel. We talk a lot about enriching and extending your pet's lives through nutrition and mental enrichment and stimulation. So that's how we got connected with Rachel.
Yeah.
Very cool. We became fast friends, and I'm really excited to introduce them to you. Definitely check them out, follow, subscribe their channels. They're out there fighting the good fight for the betterment of our dog's health. So let's jump into it. We're going to talk about chapter 2 of the Forever Dog, and this one covers dog genetics, ideal diets for dogs, how we help slow down the aging process, and how our home environment can really impact our dog's longevity. Remember, if you're just jumping in here, the Forever Dog's purpose is to help us help our dogs live and thrive as long as possible in the most natural ways. So I'll let you two kind of start off with your initial thoughts kind of early in the chapter, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, very first page of the chapter I want to talk about is this photo right here. I think it's a pretty powerful photo. Essentially, let me refresh, but it was discovered in the late 1970s, a 20,000-year-old burial pit by the shores of Hula Lake, about 16 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, where a small hunter-gatherer community once lived, capturing a period when humans made simple stones and lived in a semi-permanent dugout homes with stone walls and thatched roofs. This photograph underscores the deep interconnection of human and canine from the earliest recorded times. And so if you couldn't see, or if you're listening on the podcast, the picture is a fossilized or fossils that they found of a human and a puppy. And you can see from the photo that the human like has their hand on the puppy. I think their head, I believe.
I think their head.
And it's just such a powerful reminder of how deep the bond we have with dogs is and how far back it goes. I think, I read something today that they descended from gray wolves, I think 130,000 years ago. And that was probably about the time that they started to make connections with humans and stuff. So it's
Yeah.
really cool to learn about how long this has been progressing to get to the point where we're at now.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that point up because that was my big takeaway from the beginning of the chapter, because this is a highly debated topic, which is kind of where dogs evolved from. And science and research shows that regardless of the breed, and literally quoting from the book in chapter 2, every single dog on the planet traces back to an instinct wolf species shared by the gray wolf, just like Bryce said there. So I think this is really important to consider with not only how we feed our dogs, but how we treat our dogs, because as much as I humanize my own dogs, I'm guilty of that. I think it's important to remember that they are dogs. They are different than us and have different requirements that stems back to where they're descended from, which is the gray wolf.
Absolutely. I'm sure people have been seeing it's been all over my TikTok feed and stuff is these freak accidents where, a pit bull or different. I've seen a couple pit bulls, but it's not like breed specific. But the last one I saw was two pit bulls that I think killed was it two daughters and the wife? Or
Yeah,
maybe it
I'm not
wasn't the
sure.
wife. I can't remember the total story, but we just have to remember with dogs, like you said, Rachel, we can humanize them and do all this, but at the end of the day, they are animals. They might be domesticated, but they're far wilder than we are. And we have to kind of show that respect to them, to those instincts that they have.
Hmm.
So I think
Yeah,
it's great.
I agree. And then we'll jump into, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about the ideal and optimal diets for dogs, how genetics plays a part. But quick shout out to those of you in live with us right now: Aurora, Addison, Zenib, Yanith, Rosalie. Thank you guys for Tammy, Glitter Wolf. Thank you guys for being here on live. And those of you watching on replay, still appreciate you. Make sure you click on that subscribe button and you share this with friends and family, because this is really important information. Again, how we extend the life and the happiness of our dogs. So, do you, Bryce, want to take us into your next kind of interesting point from chapter 2?
Yeah, totally. So this wasn't exactly written about verbatim in the chapter, but one thing I've really started to discover from this book as a whole is that the obviously there's no one right way to do it, but when you're feeding fresh food, not only are there so many ways to do it, but it gets to the point where if you're eating fresh, like as a human, that's kind of all you need to do. And so I wrote down here that all diets, whether they're carnivore, vegan, vegetarian, and this is for humans only at this point, but those diets work for so many people, and people rave about how good they feel, because I think it just cuts out the processed crap. It's like
Yeah.
once you cut out the processed stuff, it obviously matters to a certain degree, but it kind of doesn't matter what fresh foods you feed as long as you're feeding the right ratios, because you're not feeding, things like in the book, they talked about advanced glycogen end products that you get from high heat processing and stuff. So I think one big takeaway I'm getting from this so far is that once you switch to fresh, there's so much room to navigate and kind of tailor it to your specific situation, that it's for everyone, I believe.
Yeah, and you really touched on something that excited me in this chapter, which is, and just in general, I think we preach this a lot. There's Wally, is the importance of going as fresh and simple as possible, and how simple it is. I think in pet food in general, we as a society of pet parents who are researched and kind of next level almost overcomplicate it, when a lot of times simpler is better. And for those of you watching on replay or live, one thing I want to clarify, because I know we have a lot of first time pet owners or new puppy dog moms. When we say fresh, Bryce, do you want to talk about what you mean when you say
Yeah.
that yeah, what fresh food is versus processed?
So there's no like regulated term in any capacity. I think our definition is minimally processed.
Mhm.
So fresh food, can be dried food still. It can be raw food. It can be gently cooked food. But it's the idea of minimal processing and minimal synthetic ingredients. We still provide some, in the foods that we feed for supplementation and stuff. But the
Yeah.
more whole foods you can get, the better. And like I said, unkibble I think is a fresh food. Spot and tank, or not spot and tango. Sundays I think is a fresh food. There's
Mhm.
a whole variety of what we mean by fresh foods, but mainly minimally processed.
Yeah, absolutely. And then processed are, kibble foods, traditional kibble foods.
Yep,
So,
absolutely. Those highly
um,
processed, high heat processing.
yeah. And so, okay, so going on to the next part of the chapter, that I found interesting are about genetics. And there was one part in here where they talked about genetics and how, what was it? That, and Bryce, we can go back and forth too if there's something before this you liked,
Okay.
but it was that the essential summary of it was that even with like the on paper perfectly bred dog, again, I know we really are big with rescuing here, but there are plenty of pet parents who follow along that do work with responsible breeders. um, Even if you have the most perfectly bred dog on paper, they can still have diseases or conditions that are rooted in the genetics of the dog. And that's why it's so important that the parts that we do have control over, which is our dog's environment, and that's just thinking about the toxins in the home, the stress we have within us that's exhibited on our dogs, and of course, diet and exercise. Those are things that we can control. And it says here that, oh, I got to find this because I thought this was really interesting.
Yeah, you're fine. Well, on the flip side of that too,
Yeah.
not only, if you have a dog with good genetics, they still may develop diseases and stuff from their environment. If you have a dog where you do testing and you find out that they're predisposed to many different ailments, that doesn't automatically mean they're going to get them. That means that that breed or might have a small, a higher chance of getting that. But with nutrition and environment, like you just said, we can really have a big impact on their longevity.
Yeah. And we'll give some examples of those in a minute. So this is the page, it's page 31 in chapter 2. Dr. Brenda Bonnet, who's a veterinary epidemiologist, says that if crossbreeding is done using the absolutely healthiest, disease-free, genetically robust poodle, for example, and the most equally perfect Labrador, chances are that offspring stand a good chance of being healthy, but there are never guarantees. And mating just any two dogs can not be presumed to produce mixed breed puppies that are healthier per chance. And so, and she goes on to explain what we just said, which is genetics can only do so much, and we have control. We have a lot more control than we realize.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere in there that like one study said that it was about 7%, and they don't know for sure, obviously, but about 7% is the role that genetics play in overall health and longevity.
Well, and this just goes back to chapter 1, what we talked about, how partners married have a higher chance of having more like, what is it, alike genetics?
Yeah, not only alike
than
genetics,
the
but
siblings do, because of the environment we're in. And we're married, so we're eating the same meals, we live the same day to day. So I believe that that's just the same, like, with your pet.
Well, and what's really interesting, Rachel, when you were reading that quote, it was talking about breeding a poodle and Labrador and how you can't just breed, two dogs and presume that they'll have mixed breed puppies. One scenario where we have experience is when we were getting Cooper and Harper, we learned about the Merle or Merle to Merle breeding, where like if you take two of Cooper and breed them, you're probably you have a much higher chance of coming out with a deaf and blind dog.
So yeah, same thing with white Pomeranians.
Oh, really?
If you breed two white Pomeranians, they can have a higher chance of not being poms and being large, like sled size, which is really dangerous for a tiny little Pomeranian to be having babies that are, that much bigger than they will be. So
wow. Yeah, so ethical breeding. If you're gonna get your dogs from a breeder, you got to do your research and just make sure it's a good situation, because then you are gonna wind up with dogs that might not have the best genetics, and it's still doable, but you're fighting an uphill battle at that point with nutrition and environment and stuff. So
absolutely. So I think another part, kind of going a little bit more into the genetics, we can talk a little bit about epigenetics, because I think that was something that was talked about quite a bit, although I feel like we've kind of touched on that. But basically what this chapter says is that food is information for our cells, and we can either turn genes on or upregulate or downregulate. And this is essentially a form of epigenetics. They actually define it as actually, this is really important, or really interesting part of the chapter. And for those of you just tuning in, we are doing a chapter review of chapter 2, a book review of The Forever Dog. And this is the book that is meant to help our dogs extend their life as long as possible. But for epigenetics, it says here that food is way more than energy. The nutrients we consume send signals from our environment to our life code, which is our DNA. These signals have the power to influence how our genes behave, and how our DNA is turned into messages that affect the functionality of our bodies, which means, as we've been saying, you have the ability to alter, for better or worse, the activity of your DNA. And these alterations are caused by extrinsic influences involved in epigenetics.
Yeah, I think the entire theme of this chapter is just that, like, the genetics is what kind of controls everything in your dog's body, but we as humans that are caretakers for them have so much control over the information we give them and the foods that we provide.
Well, and what I thought was interesting was comparing dogs to kids. Like, they just eat what is given to them. They don't have a choice in what they're being fed. They don't get to say, like, Ma. I mean, we can watch them and notice they don't really like to eat a certain thing or whatever, but they don't have a say in what they're eating. So it's both a good and a bad thing. It is our responsibility. Not a good and a bad thing, but I would say, like, a scary but also a hopeful thing.
Yeah, and not to get too conspiracy theorist, but I do feel like Big Kibble wants people to think it's hard to feed their dogs a homemade diet. I think they want them to think that balancing it is super tough, so that you have to rely on
And really
somebody else.
dangerous.
Yeah, but I mean, just look at ourselves. We do not do any of that in any capacity. We were talking about this yesterday, Rachel. We
Mhm.
we just try to eat a wide variety of foods and as many whole foods as you can. This is why they tell you, go to the grocery store, don't shop the aisles, shop the outskirts.
Yep.
The kibble is in the aisles. I'll tell you that right now.
100%. Yeah, you couldn't be further from or you couldn't be more correct. And also, for those of you watching, when Bryce says big kibble, what we mean by that are the larger conglomerates, these like top 5 to 8 corporations that own 90% of kibble out there. Think of Mars, Nestle, things like that. Now, let's divert a tiny bit because Tammy gets asked a really good question, or mentioned something about adding veggies to the bowl. And while that's not super specific in this chapter, I think it might be interesting to talk for you guys to share some of your favorite whole foods to add to the bowl if you are on a budget,
Mhm.
or you're just getting started and you are feeding a kibble or a more processed food and you want to start adding some real fresh foods to the bowl because we know it's so powerful for dogs' health. What's some of your favorites?
Yeah, absolutely. You want to start?
Yeah, I am just gonna say like my favorite way that we do this is kind of the smoothie treats that we make. So it is
Yeah.
a way to add like a piece of hydration, whether it's coconut water, bone broth, even just filtered water, and then multiple veggies and fruits
Mhm.
because dogs have a harder time breaking down the nutrients of like a whole piece of broccoli. So it needs to be cooked or it needs to be blended up really well. And so that smoothie treat is just like a really easy way. I think it's really cost effective. I think it's time effective. Like you do it one day a week and you go to the grocery store into the freezer aisle and you can get broccoli and frozen blueberries,
Like a
blackberries.
dollar a bag.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
super, super cheap. And then you just mix them up into the blender and pour them into, it doesn't even have to be cute aesthetic
No,
molds.
buy ice cube trays.
Yeah, literally
Put
just
it in a
ice cube
Ziploc bag,
trays.
make it flat, and break it up like Breaking Bad style. Do anything. But to your point, that's another great way to hide things that they don't want to eat is in
Mhm.
smoothie treats. Because if you're using bone broth or kefir or yogurt, these things that are generally pretty good tasting to dogs, you can hide a lot of what they see as nasty in
Mhm.
there. So
Yes.
I think that's probably my favorite too. Obviously, I'm a big proponent of hydration, even though there was a did you
Mhm.
see that study that
Yeah, the
came out?
water that it
Yeah,
can
I saw
increase
Rodney
inflammation.
shared
Yeah.
another like a follow-up post. He talked to an ecologist and they kind of said like, I have a lot of questions about this study before we can say like, let's start implementing this idea. So
Yeah.
I'm still a very big proponent of hydrating kibble and any dry food. But yeah, I think smoothie treats are as a BK specialty. We love
Yeah,
those
we have
over
lots
here.
of recipes. We're great starters. Lots of ideas that you can follow,
Yeah.
and then eventually you'll probably get to the point where you go like, "Oh, I'm gonna add in this egg for their coat, and I'm gonna
Yeah.
add in
That's the
these
goal.
blueberries or
Yes.
blackberries because they're full of antioxidants because they're dark fruit." And
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of fun.
Another thing with the smoothie treats too is I don't think we've ever shown this, but we need to. If you blend it up and don't want to freeze it like into cubes, you could use that for enrichment, like lick mats and stuff. It's
Mhm.
the perfect liquid base for lick mats, topples, Kongs, anything like that.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
smoothie
Yeah,
treats here.
and you guys share those every single week on your TikTok and Instagram at the BK Pets, correct?
We do our
The
best
recipes
most
most
weeks.
every week,
Yeah.
regularly. So definitely make sure
Yes.
you guys check that out. Um,
Absolutely.
so let's jump over to well, and before I say that, like those were all excellent ideas. I agree wholeheartedly. I will always be an advocate of adding some kind of hydration to the bowl of a processed diet, but I don't think hydration always has to be in the form of just water. Like it can be whole fruits and vegetables that are slightly steamed,
Mm.
because those are, 80-90% hydration there. So
Yeah.
I kind of think that's where Rodney's going to go towards, which
Mm.
I'm not necessarily against, but we'll see. Uh, so let's talk a little bit about. So I'm kind of on page, let's see, 36 here, talking about de-aging,
Mhm.
and this is really interesting. So this study at McMaster University in Canada, listen to this, demonstrated. Oh, I lost my part here. Demonstrated that old dog. Basically, the study is saying that through enrichment they can de-age or slow the aging process. But they said that old dogs can physically turn the clocks back on their brains through a combination of environmental enrichment and antioxidant fortified diet, meaning giving your dog mental stimulation, having a clean environment, not full of toxins, and really whole, fresh food rich diet. The environmental enrichment protocol, that study, entailed regularly socializing dogs. Let's remember, um, actually, I don't know your guys' stance on this, and no hard feelings either way, but I'm not a fan of dog parks. Now, what I will say is, I recently found a dog park where it's a small area. We live on a military base, so nobody really goes, and I know the people there. So I take my dogs there sometimes, but I'm definitely not a fan of just going to a random dog park and letting my dog run around. I did it for years, had many poor experiences with that. So I'm not a fan of that. And I think a lot of people think that to socialize a dog, they need to go play with a bunch of other dogs. And that's actually very far from the truth. Dogs aren't as social as we think they are, like humans are.
That's exactly what we thought when we first got
Okay.
Harper too. Our oldest one is almost 5 now, so we
Yeah.
haven't had dogs very long, but we also thought we had to socialize her with other dogs, and we
Yeah.
took both. Did we take? I don't know if we took all 3 of them, but
No,
I
but
do
definitely
believe
Cooper.
a lot of the reactivity issues that we deal with one of our dogs stemmed from the dog park because
Yeah.
it's just such an uncontrolled environment. We've shared some content about this, like reacting to other people's videos of the dog parks. This is not a diss to pet parents, but they're just not really paying much attention there, at least in our
Yeah.
experience. And
Yeah.
I mean, I went to the dog park and I would take a book.
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
Yeah,
It
we've
just
all, yeah, we thought that that's what they did. They just go
right,
play and learn from each other.
right.
yeah.
And
But
a
like you
lot of
said,
people still
Rachel,
do it, but yeah.
like you said, I think the best way to do it is if you have a dog park, go when it's empty, or if you know who's going to be there.
Yeah.
That's kind of the equivalent of like setting up play dates, which we absolutely recommend. That's a
Yeah.
great way to socialize dogs, as long as you know the people, you know the dog, you know the situation, and everybody's kind of in control.
Well, and
Yeah.
training is much more your department than ours, but we always advocate for using a dog park as a training opportunity for distractions, like not going into it, but
Mhm.
sitting outside of it and yeah,
Desensitization.
desensitizing them. And so they have a place. We recommend sniff spots. Have you heard of those?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do them all the time. I love them. Now
Really?
they were requiring for a while there that you had to have all these flea, tick, full vaccines.
Mhm.
But there were a couple people that really pushed back on that, and they leaned up a little
Good.
bit on that, which is good. So that was my only downside with them, but I do love
That's
that.
great. Yeah, I that's we haven't had access to them up here in Wyoming, but we're about to move to Colorado, and we're talking like we'll go every day if we need to get our dogs out and get the exercise they need.
Yes.
So
It's fun to explore new places with them.
absolutely.
So basically, what this is saying is to slow the aging process or even de-age our dog, right? Like have them almost lose year or gain more years, I guess is the
Mhm.
easiest way to explain it, is through socializing dogs, as we spoke about, exercise, putting demands on their cognition, so they had to think and perform tasks. The researchers documenting measurable increases um, in hormones that help these dogs live longer that approach levels found in the young dog brain. In other words, simple lifestyle strategies de-age dogs. And I really want to touch for a second on putting demands on their cognition so they had to think and perform tasks, because I had a video here on YouTube get quite a few views in the past few weeks. And I was using slow feeders and making my dogs wait before I released them to get their food. And I had several
Oh,
people say, just let them eat. Why make them work? And, studies have shown, this book shows that giving your dogs a job, giving your dog a job to do is critical, not only to their mental health, but also their livelihood and their lifespan.
Absolutely. And there's a term that we love, contra freeloading, and it's
Hmm.
basically this observed behavior in dogs. And obviously, you know all this, Rachel, but it's an observed behavior in many animals, I believe, where they want to work for their food. They're presented with free food and food that they have to work for, and they will choose the one they have to work for.
give it a shot. Try
Yeah,
it. Like it's really interesting.
you'd
We
be
have a we
shocked.
have a video of Harper with a lick mat and a bowl, and we gave them to her at the same time, and she goes for the lick mat. So
Mhm.
try it yourself. It's kind of fun to see.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's great for reducing stress and anxiety because it releases the endorphins. It's fantastic when guests come over if you need your dogs to be distracted. It's a tool that I would argue should be bought before like regular toys. Once you first get a puppy, like you have
Well,
no idea how much mental enrichment will benefit both you and your dog.
I just noticed too, like our dogs are so much less sketchy when they've been ran outside
Yeah.
or they have had
Less sketchy. I love that.
I was like, what? Are they out there like
Like-
buying stuff on the street? I don't know.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much.
like it's been in the like low teens here in Wyoming, so we have an under 20-degree rule where we don't take them out, and so it was later in the afternoon and we hadn't given them any enrichment or anything, and they're getting more comfortable jumping up on the counter and pulling things down, and we're like, oh, it's time for enrichment. Like we got to work these little brains.
And so if you're watching this right now and you have a dog that's getting into stuff and doing what you perceive as naughty things, give them an outlet for that energy, because most likely it's just that they're bored or that they're exploring. Puppies especially explore with their mouths. Give them a positive outlet for that energy, like a lick mat, a topple, anything like that, and you'll be shocked. You'll be like, this is the best dog ever, you know?
Absolutely. And we'll have favorite enrichment toys, puzzles, everything linked in the description. So you can check that out. So let's move on to, it talks a little bit about some of the, it talks a little bit about carbohydrates in food. This is a highly debated topic, and I think maybe that could be a separate video to go into detail on it. It's something I'm passionate about. But one thing it does summarize in this book on page 37 is the overall goal of how to feed dogs. And I think this is a really important takeaway. If you're feeling overwhelmed and you're like, okay, that's great information. I want to feed my dog the best. What do I feed? And the way that they summarize it in this book is the goal is to feed a low glycemic, fiber rich, good carb diet that nourishes your dog's gut and immune system while avoid feeding high glycemic refined bad carbs that provide excessive sugar and create metabolic stress. And I think that's really valuable takeaway, because if we look at most popular traditional kibbles, if we look at, you've watched my videos, I've trained you, we've learned together how to read those ingredient panels, you know that most of them are filled with, I hate using the word good and bad foods, but lower quality carbohydrates like corns or excessive grains, excessive peas, wheats, barleys used in excessive amounts are really low quality, high carb, and not super nutrient dense. So it doesn't really add a lot of value, because contradictory to this, what I call propaganda all over the internet, that dogs are omnivores. I don't believe that. And I don't know a veterinarian or scientist or research that believes that. I believe that dogs are facultative or scavenger carnivores, kind of go back and forth on that, which means it doesn't mean that they don't eat carbs. It doesn't mean that they don't eat produce or fruits. It just means that the majority of their diet comes from healthy proteins, healthy fats, and then the produce or the carbs that they do consume are going to be in the form of nutrient dense produce, fruits and veggies.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great point to bring up, is the fact that we also believe dogs are scavenging carnivores. And again, like you said, it does not mean that they don't eat plant material or can't benefit from it. But we look at the anatomy of the dog, the sharp teeth, the acidic stomach, the short digestive tract,
The jaw.
the fact that the jaw doesn't move left and right to grind vegetables and stuff. They also don't produce, I think it's a specific enzyme that we do, amylase, right? That starts to break down. That's why you have to blend and cook a lot of the vegetables that you feed, is because they don't have the ability. Totally lost where I was going with that.
One thing that I think is interesting that like really helped me understand this whole area. So I don't understand a lot of this stuff as much as Bryce and Rachel do, but I think that's one of the strengths about the BK Pets is I'm able to be like, I don't get what you're talking about. So I can help him make the content more digestible. But anyways, what helped me a lot with that was like, for example, a wolf out in the wild, they take down an animal, they're eating it. They're typically going to eat the stomach contents. And a lot of the animals that they're eating are plant eaters. So that's where they will sometimes get some of those like plant-based materials. It's not like they're necessarily going out and like foraging the
But
raspberries and
sometimes
stuff.
they
Mhm.
do. I actually learned
Yeah.
in the last few days that, like, because they're scavenging carnivores, they're
Mm.
opportunists. So when meat supplies are scarce, they will
Mhm.
go and forage for that stuff.
Oh,
100%.
interesting.
And
Yeah,
so I had a
blueberries,
comment
raspberries.
today. We were recommending pumpkin for, its multitude of benefits, but somebody said wolves don't eat pumpkins. And I replied and I said, well, number one, dogs aren't wolves. Like, yes, they are closely related. But number two, wolves did consume plant matter, obviously, like you said, in the content. And then when they were, foraging when other food was scarce, it doesn't
Mhm.
mean they were eating pumpkins out there, but that does mean that they could benefit from some of these plant foods, even if they didn't have access to them.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's, I would have no doubt if there's been a situation where a pumpkin grew and kind of bursted open
Yeah,
naturally and and a wolf went and ate part of it. I have no
totally.
doubt that I'm sure it has. We should look into that. I bet
Mhm.
you there's footage. I know that would be a dream to go watch some wolves in their natural habitat and just kind of, there's groups that take you out.
Oh,
It'd be
wow.
interesting. It'd be interesting to see that.
It
So
would.
then a lot of people will at this point have questions of like, okay, then why are veterinarians recommending a more traditional,
Mhm.
ultra processed kibble if fresh foods are better? And it says here on page 39 in chapter 2 of The Forever Dog, um, vets who encourage people to feed dogs pet food their whole lives argue that pet foods have been designed to meet nutritional needs, while junk food clearly does not meet nutritional needs. There are a few ultra processed human foods that are labeled as all-in-one nutritionally complete foods like Total Brand cereal or Ensure. These are the best comparisons to what we've been told to feed our pets for a lifetime. Scientifically formulated, everything you need pellets. I thought that was interesting. And basically, what they say is the only family members eating ultra processed foods their entire lives are our pets.
Yep. I think that's one of the things that keeps me up at night because you look at zoos and stuff and you don't see the lions and tigers eating kibble. You see
Yeah.
them eating real meat carcasses because that's what they have evolved to eat. And I think that what people don't realize is we've talked about this a little bit, but we don't claim vets get kickbacks and stuff, but what we do
Right.
say is Big Kibble has a farther reach in the specifically the veterinary education industry than a lot of people realize. And I think that when you have a company, when you have, let's say, a candy company who is creating the pet food, and then they're educating or they have influence on the education of vets who have a choice on what food to recommend, and then they buy vet clinics to put vets on the payroll, you're setting it up to basically just be a monopoly. And, I know monopoly is kind of one, but it's basically, like you said, five to six, seven, eight
Yeah.
companies that control, I don't know, the majority of the market.
Yeah.
So,
It's pretty insane. And it's interesting in the comments here. Big shout out to Jobus, Bella, Tammy again, Ava, Nathan for being here on the live and Addison's. So Addison's video says, I hate how some treats and kibbles can literally cause sickness, yet not many people care. Like milk bone can literally cause cancer and people still give their dogs every day. And Addison's videos, thank you for chiming in. Oh, Nathan says, my dog prefers human foods over pet foods.
mhm.
Her favorite is I can't read what that word is, but there. And then Izzy Stack says, I feed holistic food to my dog. So I think what we're seeing is I don't think a lot of times it's that people don't care and that's why they feed foods like a milk bone that's full of really low quality, not species appropriate ingredients. I think it's just that um, these big pet food corporations and pet treat corporations are what I've said multiple times before, the greatest marketers of all time.
Yeah,
They
All
are,
time.
yeah, they are buying our decisions, our choices, because they've convinced an entire group. Veterinarians is a good example. Even researched pet parents like myself, who used to feed all of these low quality things, that these were actually healthy foods.
mhm. And Rachel, I want to get your opinion on something. So a lot of
Mm.
vets and conventional kibble advocates will say that the ingredient list is the worst way to judge a food, and that it's not about the ingredients; it's about
Mm.
meeting those specific nutrient amounts in your dog's diet. What are your thoughts on that?
My first thought on that is a marketing that was driven by a marketing company because that makes zero sense. I think I did an interview on my Instagram with Dr. Oh, I'm drawing a blank now. A veterinarian from UC Davis. I'll have to go back and remember and look up her name. But she said that within pet food, she's pro fresh food for dogs. She said there's not very much. Oh, now I can't even remember her saying, but basically she said there's a lack of common sense when it comes into what we recommend feeding our dogs from the veterinarian level and down. And if somebody were to tell me for my own diet that the ingredients don't matter, it just matters what the actual nutrients are, um, that contradicts everything that nutrition science tells us. That makes no sense. And in my opinion, is clearly driven by uh, marketing dollars
Yeah, absolutely. And
and a different agenda.
I'm actually taking a pet nutrition coach certification course through the NAVC, North American Veterinary
Mhm.
Community. And in one of their paragraphs, they talk about, which I disagreed with at first, but now I've come around to, they talk about how synthetic nutrients, vitamins, and minerals are not any chemically different than whole food sources of those nutrients. And I was like, well, that's BS. But then I was like, okay, chemically, it might actually be the exact same thing. And then they go on to talk about, they say, however, bioavailability may
Bioavailability,
be
yeah.
different. And
Mhm.
that's what we mean when we talk about a species appropriate diet is if you're feeding foods that that dog has evolved to eat, you're giving them the best chance to absorb the most nutrients possible. And when you start adding in all these human processes, these chemicals, these synthetic ingredients, you're altering that really delicate system that has evolved for millions of years to get to the point that it's at.
Yeah. That's
So,
insane. It's crazy. It's just like human food. It's all money driven. And that's why, when I'm talking about brands or do these dog food reviews, one of the things I look for are how the food is funded. Is it equity backed? What's their mission? What are they, how are they sourcing? Because all of that's going to be telling to the quality of the food, in my opinion.
absolutely, and we've been getting a lot of questions about the recent acquisition of Champion
Hmm.
Pet Foods, makers of
Hmm.
Akana and Origin by Mars, and people saying, well, why would they change the ingredients if it's already such a like a well-selling food? And my response to that is, they may not change the ingredients, but what they don't have to tell you is where they source their stuff from. They could easily change the sources. So if it's chicken breast, they might be getting chicken breast that's much lower quality than Akana and Origin used to get. I don't know much about them pre Mars, but there are things that companies can do to change your food that they don't have to disclose to you in any
Hmm.
capacity. And
Yeah.
there's people like Susan Thixton and Dr. Judy Morgan trying to fight with the FDA about stuff like that. But as you know, Rachel, that's not a fast process.
No, it's not. And I'm so happy they're out there kind of fighting that fight because that's just that kind of, I get to at that point, I'm kind of, we just, at the end of the day, too, with all of this, is it can become overwhelming quickly. And I think a lot of people are like, where do I start? How do I do this? I feel overwhelmed. It's like with anything in life, for me at least, is start slow, start gradual, and do the best that you can within your situation, whether that's your financial situation or your time. Because if you get to the point where you don't do anything different or you don't try to improve your dog's life at all because it seems too much, it's a lose lose situation.
Yeah, and back to what we were talking about with fresh or like homemade feeding being super complicated. If you feel overwhelmed about feeding fresh, especially feeding a homemade diet, that's because there are people that want you to feel that way. And
Yeah.
like Rachel can attest to this, I texted her yesterday in an absolute panic because I was developing some recipes and started freaking out because I was like, I have to balance this to NRC guidelines, and then I took a step back and I said, why? What like
Yeah.
no one does this for themselves. There's no reason. And so it's valid to be overwhelmed about the idea of feeding
Mhm.
homemade and fresh food, but we're gonna make it simple for you.
Yeah.
We
Oh,
will for sure.
Wally, Wally's barking out there. The leaf blowers here, which is lovely timing. I don't know why they're coming so late in the afternoon. Okay, so I think we're getting towards the end of the chapter here. But one thing they did talk about was the fact that dogs are increasingly isolated. And that as we, as humans, have become more sedentary, we're online more, working on computers all the time, not going outside, it can actually be detrimental to our dog's health and their lifespan when they don't get the access and the ability, like you guys were talking about Sniff Spot, to be out and about in the real world and to experience dirt, to experience sniffing, and the cognitive benefits of going on a little adventure.
Yep. And that kind of stuff can actually boost the immune system. That can allow your
Mhm.
dog to go out in nature, can help them deal with local allergies. And so I think it's like you said, it's so important to get your dog on some dirt or some grass and get them out in the sun. They might not absorb vitamin D through the sun like we do, but it's like breathing the fresh air. It's so important. And I think, we don't do it every day. We try to make it a point, though, to do something every single day where our dogs are outside for a
I mean, they
period of
go
time.
outside to go to the bathroom. Like,
Absolutely.
luckily, we live in an area where it's much more normal to have houses and yards.
Yeah.
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 We're not in a city with high-rise apartments and
Yeah. Cement sidewalks. And
yeah,
I mean, we do have those, but we got a lot of grass here.
yeah.
So, yeah, I think you're totally right, Rachel.
Yeah, and I think even just opening a window, like let's say you do live in a high rise and you really can't, like just open, even if it's cold for a little bit, right? Open the window, get the fresh air in. I mean, the EPA, this always amazes me. The EPA says that indoor air quality, especially in these winter months when we have the windows shut for so much time, can be up to 100 times, 100 times worse than air quality outdoors. And
Wow.
Well,
that's
and
because
that's
we don't have the circulation.
not
Hmm.
even getting into the synthetic fragrances,
Yeah.
Oh my
which
God.
I mean is the ending part of this chapter. Like the
Yeah.
chemicals that our pets are absorbing. They
Mm.
spend how much time on the floor? All of their time.
Yeah.
The even down to what the like not ingredients but materials that your couch is made of.
Hmm.
The end of this book or this chapter overwhelmed me because we just bought a couch for our new house and I'm like, oh my gosh, we didn't even check what our couch was made out of. And Bryce was like, we're going to do the best we can.
Yeah.
We're going to start with what we can. And I resonate with it being overwhelming, like
Yeah.
just being a pet parent in general,
And so to those watching, you're not going to be able to get rid of everything that could be potentially toxic to your dogs.
Mhm.
Just start with what you can and just understand that everyone, including us, is doing the best we can at all times. So try not to be hard on yourself.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better. Well, I think that's a good ending point. I think that was a really good
Wonderful.
conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and to everyone watching, we'll try to get it figured out next week where we can take some questions and stuff. We were
Yeah.
late getting started today, and then obviously once we get going, it's hard to stop us. So we'll
Yeah.
definitely try to do some questions next week. But yeah, Rachel, thank you. I think chapter 2 is definitely getting into a little bit of the heavier stuff with the genetics and everything. But I think people hopefully have a good grasp on somewhere to start and just an open mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So make sure I'll have all of the BK Pets, Bryce and Kenzie's links to all their things in the description. So go check them out, follow, subscribe if you haven't. And we will be back here next week, which, hold on, what's the date? What's Thursday?
The
So if you,
8th, is
okay,
that
the
right?
8th of December, hopefully at 2 p.m. Pacific.
Mhm.
Make sure you come back and read chapter 3 so that you can chat with us.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone watching.
All right,
Appreciate it.
guys, have a beautiful day. Goodbye.
Thanks, Rachel.
Bye.
Bye.